everyone, welcome to Handmade Hero, show we code a complete game live on stream. We have our user interface stuff working now to edit attachment points, but it's not quite complete. So we did the work necessary to kind of use our debug UI system as well for doing editing, and we got that working on last stream, but there's a couple things that we didn't implement yet, and we sort of have options of how we might do that, and we'll see how we want to we'll see how we want to kind of fuss around with that. But we've put ourselves in a good position to attack it now. So what I'd like to do is jump in there, figure out what other stuff we need to do, and just basically clean up that interface in a usability sense, adding the features we need to actually edit some of the elements, and adding anything else that we need to make sure that it feels okay to actually do edits on it. And we'll see if we can get by the end of the stream to the point where we're editing those points fairly reasonably. So that's all we're going to be doing, and it's a fairly nicely contained problem. Let me show you where we're at on this, and I'll mention sort of the things we're going to do probably in order, but there is no real importance to the order. It's just probably how we'll tackle them. So here's the game running, right? And we oops, let me go ahead and jump that to full screen. There's a couple things we want to do. So the debug UI lost its snapping stuff because we kind of changed how the render would work. We want these things to probably snap to the upper corner, so I'd like to kind of get that going. I don't want to have to keep dealing with them going where they're going there. And if you go like this, then they're off the screen entirely, right? So I think we should try and restore that functionality. I don't think that would take very long. It's something we should probably fix. But that's neither here nor there. That's just something we should take a look at. So when we have this interface stuff, you can see all we did is we just kind of slammed that UI into the center of the screen. So the first thing we want to do, actually move this over here so that it's kind of in the corner or somewhere where it's like a window we can actually interact with in a more meaningful way that isn't just at 0, 0 because that's what I typed in, right? Not a very good reason. We want these to look more like buttons, and we also maybe want them to be a little bit harder to hit. I don't really want the save button like right next to my undo button. So, we want to kind of get this UI into a more UI-like state, right? Because all we did was just the bare bones wiring necessary to have it be in there. And we didn't really spend any time on actual human factors. We could do a little bit more there to get that nicer, right? So I'd like to do that. Again, because remember, this is just all we're doing here is just this, right? All we're doing is getting these debug features here that we've got. We're just putting that in here. That's all we've been doing. And so, it's not really, we haven't implemented any of this stuff specific to the editor. We've just been using these buttons that we made. So, like we made a long time ago. So, we want that to work. And so moving that over there and having that be some kind of a thing that we can more conveniently access and use, that's good. And then what we want to do is work on these right here. So some of these are going to be pretty simple. Like toParent is just a toggle, right? So clicking that on and off, that's going to be really simple. Same thing here with like type, right? Like that's just going to be like either a click. We could do a click to just toggle through things, or we could have like left and right arrows to go back and forth between the different ones or something. But since there's not going to be that many of those, we probably don't even really need a drop-down list or anything. So I don't even know that we want to go through the trouble of implementing something like that because it's probably just overkill for what we're looking at. So we could probably do something simpler there as well. We've got this size, and that's, again, also very simple because even just a simple interaction that would allow us to drag up and down on it would be sufficient, and we already kind of implemented one of those. So that would probably be very simple for us to implement. So really the big one that's a little confusing that we haven't really done much with is this %p. Again, though, we could just cheese this out. This is just for us doing basic alignment work. So we could just make something where we hold on it and just move around, and it just adjusts the values of it or something as we move. So I don't really think there's going to be a lot of work involved in doing these. That's not the primary part of it. I think it's going to be pretty straightforward, right? So I think we can hack those in there pretty quickly, and they may just be good enough. We do want to pretty this up a little bit, I think, like I said, and make it a little bit easier to use. So there's some of that probably should happen. So we'll take a look at that. But the biggest thing that I think we're going to have to do in an implementation sense is once we allow that sort of dragging ability, like of the size and that sort of thing, what we're going to do is we're going to we're going to run into a problem where our undo buffer just fills up, because as you drag it around, it's going to push undo, 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 undo on there, right? And so one thing that we probably want to do is we need our like undo redo system. Instead of adding an undo for every modification that you make, we need it to understand the concept that when you start an interaction, you would create an undo, and when you end the interaction, you would write to that undo. But no matter how you drag the thing, you're only going to save the initial state and the end state, and you're never going to do any kind of like recording of what all those motions were. You just need to know what was the original size and what was the final size, because that's all the undo and redo are going to care about. So it's going to be way too difficult for the user to deal with 8 million undos for their drag, and they'd have to wail on the undo button forever to like get that undo done. So we don't want to do that, right? So we're going to have to address that, and that's more of a real implementation problem. Like, we're going to have to do a little bit of thinking there and make sure that we do that correctly in a way that's easy to use, so that as we add things to the system, if we add more edit operations, it's not a problem to have them still understand and go through that system, right? So that's what we're looking at. And so let's start with just the basics. Let's just warm up with some basics here. Let's try to get these things to be editable. So like, let's just get each of these things editable. And the other thing that I would like to do here is sort of consider the fact that that when we are done making these things editable, we should also stop allowing click-through on anything that's sort of in this window region. Because right now, if you don't have a valid thing to interact with, it's considered a selection. So for example, let's say I click on this, which is not a thing. It actually just looks past it and grabs whatever's on the other side. As opposed to what happens if I click on this, which is a known button, it actually prevents a selection, which is what we want. So we would like to also, while we're while we're going through this process, we would like to think a little bit more seriously about how we're going to say what is and isn't a valid click-through, and probably everything within like a window region of this editor, more or less, right? I don't know how we want to say that. Maybe we'll just make a size that it is over in the corner or something. That is just going to be off limits. So you click in there and it's never going to do pick through, because that's just confusing, and it's almost certainly not what any user would want to have happen. Like, they're not going to be, just because the thing wasn't interactive that they're clicking on doesn't mean they want to select the thing behind it usually. Maybe they do, but it's probably not the most likely case. So, principle of least surprise and whatnot there. So going over to the editor side of things here, what you can see in like when we have all the stuff that we were working on, like the undo system and stuff like that, we've got these buttons, and the buttons have like an if, and then you do something and it returns back the the true if it was pushed and false otherwise, right? And if we look at what happens with these things here, like editable boolean, editable type, editable size, those sorts of things, the problem that we get there, again, is that, like I said, right off the bat, we end up in a situation where those things are going to push on undo records every time they change. Now, that may be a reasonable thing for type, and that may be a reasonable thing for to parent, but it's not really good for size and %p. So as I'm looking at these, as I'm doing the actual implementation of the edit to begin with, what I would like to do is maybe upgrade my notion a little bit of what this end edit block actually is going to get as a return. And what I'd like to do there is say, look, what if we could switch on the end edit block instead of just an if? What if in here I could say, like, edit block begin modification, edit block, end modification, that kind of thing. And so in here I could say, look, here's a bunch of edits that happen with these align points. I'd like to know whether we started one or whether we're ending one, right? And with that information, I can go ahead and do something reasonable. We could also include the concept of cancellation in here, which is to say, if you were doing a drag and hit the escape key, or who knows what our semantics would be for that. It's decaf, by the way. I don't normally drink coffee this late, but I do like to drink decaf this late. So if you do want to cancel the modification, we could have that be handled directly in here by just not committing that undo at all, right? So what I'd like to do here is just look at what that would entail exactly. And one of the interesting things about that is if you look at what happens with edit align point, it's kind of got a couple different phases to it, right? If you look at what happens here, it sort of has the begin and end in it, right? It kind of has those stages all going on inside the routine. You can see, like, it looks like this. Like, this is end, this is, begin, and this is during, in a sense, right? So you can kind of see what's going on there, and what we need to do is break that up, or, we need to do something that will allow us to aggregate that. Now, there's a couple different ways we could do that. And, thinking it through, if we really wanted to be a little fancier about this, maybe one thing we could say is, what if we just leaned on the undo system and said, maybe the undo system itself is responsible for aggregating these things, maybe there's sort of like an interim idea there that maybe there's like an interim idea there that we can lean on, that we don't have to actually manually go through these processes in the first place either, right? And so maybe one thing we could say is, like, maybe we could say something where, like, all right, maybe the original way was fine. Maybe we don't need to really think about those things. And maybe what we can do instead is just say, hey, we've got this notion already in the editor of these sort of lists of changes. So we've got these things, right? And maybe what we want to do is say, like, a in progress, list. And maybe what we say is, when you're doing editing, maybe instead of things going on the undo stack, maybe they all go into the in progress stack, right? And then only once you confirm an edit will those things actually go onto the undo stack. And until then, they won't. What that allows us to do is it gives us that cancellation ability, right? But it also gives us the ability to merge. So when we say edit align point, maybe what we can do there is merge those changes. When you do this operation, we can change it from something that allocates a new one of these to something that first looks to see whether or not there already was one edit of this type, and if there was, we merge them together, right? That to me sounds fairly compelling. I like the idea of that. And so I think I'm going to run with that instead. What that means is it's nice. We can ignore this for now. We can leave it exactly the way that it was. We don't have to change anything. And what I can do is just implement these as I wanted to, and then we'll come back to it later and get this working, right? That sounds like the right approach to me, and that's what I'm going to go with. And by the way, the reason it sounded like the right approach to me was what I imagined in my head was I was like, okay, since I don't have a real reason to pick one or the other in this particular case, what would a more complex case want, right? Because if I don't have a reason to pick one or the other here, what would a more complex case want? And in a more complex case, we might have operations that do a bunch of things, like complicated loops that look over things and make changes. I don't want those loops to have to be aware of which points they've edited so far and which ones they haven't. I want them to just go ahead and edit whatever they want to edit. And then I'd like the undo system to go ahead and aggregate any changes that have to be aggregated as that as a consequence of that process. That to me then said, oh, okay, so I need basically like a little in progress ring that I can just say, here's all the edits that have happened that are not committed yet, that are up for aggregation and up for cancellation, and then I'll just deal with those in bulk. Does that make sense? Hold on while I dechap. So if we now just go in and look in at this part here, knowing that I'm going to handle that part later, I can now do things in exactly the order I said that I want to do them, which is just implement these actual editor functions here, and then we'll deal with the fallout from it in a minute. I'm going to use the same trick we used before to speak about which ones of these things are actually happening. So I'm just going to go ahead in here and add this sort of unique identifier to each of these, because I think I will like that ability to sort of track that as we go forward. And so, because that gives me the option of having like multi-step UI and always to know which one of them I'm talking about and so on. So now if I come back to here and we go back and look at where those things are being called, like editable, boolean, editable, type, editable, size, right? So where those things were getting called, I now want the ability to do the same thing I was doing before, which is to pass a dev ID here, so that any interactions that we have will kind of work with these, right? We'll work through these IDs. So I'm just going to sort of spam those in there and have it so each of these will take one of those things. Now, the easiest thing by far to implement here is the editable boolean. The reason that the easiest thing to edit is the editable boolean is because really it's just a button, right? So what we can do is we don't even really need to implement another piece of code. What we can do is just call the button code and leave it at that. So for example, in here, editable boolean, it's like label text. Instead of calling label, we'll just call this. So when I come through here, I'll say, all right. And again, I would really like to stress, a lot of people are used to looking at weird tortured class hierarchy sorts of stuff for UI. It's not great. You don't have to do ridiculous stuff like inherit from a thing in order to get the functionality of the thing. Functional composition works. It just works. So if you have something like a Boolean and you just want to use the button code for it, just use it, right? Just write it as a function, and then they compose. They compose really well. You don't need to go through all of that ridiculous object-oriented nonsense to get basic things like composition. It just works. Objects are not needed. They're just not relevant to it, right? It's a separate kind of concept. Functional decomposition just is a basic thing that works in programming. It doesn't require these sort of overbearing mindsets to get to. So what I can do is I can just say, look, the Boolean, it's just a button. So if that button actually gets, actually gets pressed, then I'm gonna take the value and not it, right? So that's all I want to do there, right? That's how that works. And so we can implement the editable Boolean really, really trivially once we have those IDs flowing through properly. And really all we need to do there is say, well, we might want some way of saying which one it is. I don't know that I need that to be like a :true or :false or anything. We could make it be like a checkbox or something like that. It's hard for me to say what the best way to do that is. I really don't know, okay? So one way we could do it is by leaving the label call in. So we pass the label text here. You know what I'm saying? And then in here with the button code, we actually just switch on the value and say, well, either we're going to draw nothing in the case where it's not set, or we're going to draw something. Or maybe to be a little bit more specific, we'll do like that, right? And again, a fancier UI, we'd draw something like a checkbox or something like that. But in this case, I don't know that I really want to go through that kind of trouble because, again, this is just a simple little UI for us to use. And so something like this is really all that we want to be able to do. Now, I need to get this actually working, and for some reason I'm not getting my my callback there, which I'm not sure why we wouldn't, because that should properly give me my, never mind. That is working just fine. We didn't finish the last part of the problem. So begin edit block is the thing that controls whether these things ever get written back, right? So in here where we do our edit align point, this has to return true in order for us to ever reach this part of the code and actually do the change. So what that means is in here, when we're actually doing this, we have to, these pieces of code have to write to the layout and let this edit block know, right, whether those changes occurred. So let's do that. It's really easy. What we're doing here is, edit occurred or something like that, right? We just want to set that to true. And all of these want to do the same, right? They want to set it to true as well, okay? So what do I do now is when I set that, that edit occurred, right, I want that to be tracked and probably throughout just the layout struct, right? So I want that to be tracked here as edit occurred. And what I want to do is in UI edit block, now you'll notice, and I said this when I added it. Remember, I was a little bit cryptic about it, but I said this very specifically. Wish I had some water. I forgot my water. What I want to do here is I want to make it so that it's free to nest these edit blocks if you want to, right? So I want you to be able to do like a begin, and then an end, and I want that to work. I don't know that I ever will use that, but just I've learned from having programmed for so long that it's really free for me to do that if I just leverage the function stack, the actual execution stack, to do that for me. So you'll notice that when I wrote this, when I wrote begin and edit block, I had begin edit block return dev UI edit block, and I had that get passed in here. Why did I do that? Well, the reason that I did that was because I wanted to make sure that I could store the previous state of edit occurred somewhere. And that gives me a place to store it. So now we know what's going to go in here, right? And now we know what's going to happen here. Okay? So now, when we come back in here, the result is very easy for us to produce. It's just, did an edit occur or didn't it? And we can preserve the nesting behavior by just going ahead and taking whatever the block's previous value was, which we saved, and restoring it. If we hadn't done that and we wanted that behavior, we would have needed our own stack here. And that stack would have had to have been limited or dynamically allocated or some other less efficient thing. Whereas if we just track the program stack, it just works, right? Because the program stack always has to actually have that shape to it. So that's usually the way you want to do that because it usually gets it for you for free. There's some cases where it can't, specifically if you actually have things that are non-recursive that do their own stack walking. But even in that case, this can usually just go into the stack storage. So you almost always get it for free if you do it this way. And that's much nicer, right? So I highly recommend that, and that's why I wrote it this way. That means now we're done, right? That was the whole thing. It was literally like 4 lines of code or something. The tracking of whether anybody edited anything during that block and nesting and all that stuff, just a couple lines of code, really, really simple, right? And that's why I like that construction. It's just that simple. So here I can set this thing on and off, like you can see. And, you know, for some reason, like I said, we were having some problems with our baseline computation. I don't know why. I don't know when that happened. Do you notice that? Like we lost our baselines. And I feel like that was that something that happened when we upgraded our art format? I want to look and see if that was the case, because I'd be interested to know when that happened exactly. We should probably look at that. We could even look at that now. But anyway, I think that's fine. So there's the code for the editable Boolean. Again, really, really simple. Again, one of the things that I really like about these constructions is they let you do a tremendous amount of easy work that you don't have to be too fancy or inherit based or any of that stuff to do. It's pretty nice. Now, coming up here is something that's a little bit nasty because it's a case where you want to be able to have more flexibility, but as I think you'll see in a second, it turns out that we can probably do a few quick gyrations and actually still make it pretty easy to do what we want to do. So what I'd like to do here on the dev ID side of things is I would actually like to make two buttons when I'm only getting called with one dev ID. You can see why that's a bit of an issue, right? Because that makes things a little bit more complicated than we would have liked it to be. But one of the things that we can look at there is that actually, because the interactions themselves can have different states, I could probably get away with doing something a little bit. I could probably get away with some shenanigans to make this work. But we could also just consider making our dev ID a little bit more expressive. That would also be a totally valid way to go. So we'll have to see which one we want to do. But here's what I want to do. I want to basically have a way to increment or decrement this particular value that's here. So I effectively want to be able to do something roughly along the lines of, this. So we can basically increment or decrement this thing, and the edit occurs depending on which one we do, right? And then we just have some crappy left or right arrows that allow us to make those changes, right? So it's two sub buttons. This would just work if we had some way of taking a dev ID and making sort of a subordinate version of that thing that allows us to do more than one type of edit to it, which at the moment we really don't have, right? We don't have a way of making a subordinate version of the dev ID, and that's kind of a problem. We would have liked there to have been some way for us to do that, and at the moment there really isn't much of a way for us to do that. So the question is, what's the best way for us to make this a little bit more flexible and have there be some way to do that, right? Well, there's a couple things that happen in here that we may want to take a look at. So if we, and I'm not sure which one I want to do yet, so I'm kind of saying this more as a provisional thing, but I want to go into Dev UI and just take a look at how this stuff is generally structured, right? So in here, there's some things that we call, some general things that we ask. That's what we use the Dev UI stuff, the Dev ID stuff for. We do things like asking if two interactions are equal, right? Or asking if two interactions are hot. And what you kind of see there is the interaction actually is a much richer structure than just the dev ID. So if we were to make a more expressive version of our button call, right? Meaning this right here, if we were to make a more expressive version of that. So for example, maybe something that looks like this. Where we pass the dev ID and a target parameter, let's say, or a generic or something like that, like other information that we may want to have on there. So we know it's a button, so we know it's a button interaction, but maybe we want some other things. So I can add another thing here, which is like, some other operation, like something like this, or a classifier, Then what I could do is when I come through here, I can set that classifier, I can set something there, like the target can be this, or I can have the generic be set to that, whatever I want to do. Now I'll actually be getting some discrimination there. What that means is that when I call this function, I get more than I was getting when I called one of these. And so what I can do there is I can now go, all right, when I call this function, I really just thump through. I say I've got a dev ID and I don't have one of these classifiers. Off we go. And I just return whatever the result is that I have. Now I've got a more powerful version of the button. And so what I can do there is call that version when I need to do things that are more complicated like this, right? And so it's pretty easy for me to do basically whatever I want there. I can make up any old thing. I can use this string pointer if I want to, right? I can do anything I want. So I can literally just do something like, left label, right label, right? And at that point, I should be able to have both of these things, right? They should both be there. Now, what's going to happen when I actually allow this editing is we also need some notion of what would be a legal value, because we're going to immediately set these to some pretty invalid values if I let that actually be the entirety of the editing, right? But it would work. So this is, you know, you can see them highlighting separately. So I think we're good to go there, right? So what I want to do is I want to, also I suppose we should print this out because we're not actually printing this out yet either. So we also want to do this, right? I don't know if we've got, where's our label F? Yeah, we've got our label F. So I should be able to do my label F here, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we did some kind of thing where we passed a capital S. Yeah. So we actually already have a way of outputting one of these strings that's much more convenient than the normal C way, where you have to pass like the count and then the length as two separate parameters. So we should also be able to print out what the type currently is. And so, you know, that gives us, again, another kind of, like, you know, we got the type field there, and I should be able to kind of cycle through these. Of course, it doesn't look like I'm actually cycling through these for some reason, so we'll have to see why. But that's basically all we're talking about there, right? And so, again, we want to clean this up. It looks horrid, and I also need to figure out why we're getting those weird, why we're not getting proper baselining on those values. I really don't know why. But it may be that we're interpreting it the wrong way round, too. I'm not sure. So we'll see what's going on there. But so let me just take a look at why we're not getting the correct strings coming through there, or maybe if the editing isn't happening properly would be the other thing. So we should probably take a look and see if there's something weird going on there. But let me see what's up. So yeah, if I look, let's see here. So we're sort of doing a U32 pointerification of this, which I'm not sure is a good thing. What we may want to do here is actually grab it in a way that's editable, more like that, just to be safe. Let me make sure, because I don't really know if that cast is okay there. It's probably a problem. So yeah, if I want to call that, I have to cast it back, which is fine with me. Let's see here, edit a line point, line point type. I just want that to be U32 because as I pass that in here, I don't really want that to be, I don't want that in the mix. So let me make sure that wasn't part of the problem, and then we'll go in and debug it as we go. Yeah, you can kind of see like we're just not getting any changes to the value there for whatever reason. And so I want to go see why that's happening. I also want to look at this again to, I don't remember what's actually supposed to happen there. So we're calling a line point name from type. So we're calling this, and it's always returning this for some reason. And so I don't know why that's happening, and we'll have to take a look. Cause yeah, I don't know why that would be the case. It seems like that should be incrementing. But what I was gonna say, in addition to all of that, which we'll go debug now, is once you know that an edit has taken place, we need to actually check the bounds. So here we need to do like if the type is greater than whatever the count is of these things. So these types here that we're using for align points, we want to count in there, and we want to say that if we've gotten out of the bounds of what's allowed here, we want to make sure that we wrap that properly, right? And so there's two cases that could happen. One is that it gets decremented on 0, right? And that would wrap us round. Of course, once you decrement to 0, you've effectively killed the type, so it would actually have to be recreated. So I'm not sure that case really matters much. But if we come out around here, we would want to wrap back around to probably to the default, I want to say, you know, to 1 if we got pass count, is my guess. And if we got to 0, so probably if we got to 0, we would actually want to set it to count -1. Because we don't really want you to ever set it to 0 because that's the same as deleting it. So we would rather have you click on the delete key to make it clear that's what you were doing. And so that would prevent that from happening. Now we just have to go see why this operation doesn't seem to actually be doing anything. I'm going to switch ourselves over to debug mode just because if I'm going to step to do something, I want to be able to see everything more clearly. Debug mode is the only real way to do that with the Visual Studio Debugger. It's not very good at debugging release mode code. So I'm going to set a breakpoint at editable type. That should just allow me to go in there and set a breakpoint once I actually have once I actually break on this function itself. I'm going to get rid of that breakpoint, and then I'm going to set one inside the 2 buttons. So when I click on one of these, I should see this occur. Right, I should get an actual operation that makes that case get hit. So here, if I select one of these and I go over here and I click on it, right, I should see, and I do, right. So I should see this occur. So let me take a look at what the watch variables are here. Let's look at what that value is. It's properly set to default right now. I don't know what I was thinking there. That's not at all what I wanted. I just didn't want that at all. I wanted that. So don't ask me what I was thinking about there because I don't know. So yeah, what I wanted to do was not that. I effectively want to do this actually. I guess I should do it more like that. What I want to do is just increment or decrement this thing. So that was probably the entirety of my stupidity wrapped up in that little equal sign that wasn't supposed to be there. All right, so let's take a look at that real quick and just see if that fixes our problem. It doesn't still. Okay, so maybe I wasn't as stupid as I thought I was, although that was still stupid. So I kind of was, whether we like it or not. So if we stop here, here's that value. I just want to see that value change. So it went up to 1, so that's good. And now I want to take a look at why our value has changed. Now, what's interesting is if the value was 0 there, that's actually kind of strange because does that mean it did both of these? Because that could be what happened. Let's take a quick look there. Okay, so that's what happened. It decrements, then it increments. So I was going to say, looking at the old one, I was like, it still should have worked. It was just really stupid looking code. So when we're doing the button, for some reason, the interaction is not properly registering as having occurred or not. And, you know, I realize, I think, why. I think it's basically because inside the dev UI, we didn't faithfully maintain the fact that these should have been interactions. Right? And we want that to be the case. So in here, I think what I want to do is say, yeah, we want to create this interaction. And we want to do an R equals for those, right? And that's actually what we're going to check. And I need to go see what the name of that was. Its interactions are equal. I don't really know that we want to type that every time. R equal would have probably been better, but you know, life goes on. So we want to just make sure that whole thing is solid. And that should do it. So now we'll get the proper tracking, which is what I wanted. And we should be able to just move on to the next thing, hopefully. Let's see here. Yeah, there we go. So now we can sort of set those, and I would probably prefer it if we had some better rendering of them, so we're going to have to go spend a little bit of time on that so things aren't horribly ugly. But otherwise, it looks like our UI is now working just fine, right? So I can cycle through these things here, and off we go, right? So that's all good. And to parent is toggleable as well. So other than the fact that it's horribly ugly and not very usable in that sense, it's all implemented properly now. And so we'll do the size and percent as well, and then we'll just clean up this line so it looks pretty, right? That'll be the next thing that we want to focus on. And maybe get a window around there as well, you know, maybe that sort of stuff. So in terms of like size and percent %p, again, I think these are just going to be draggy kind of operations, right? And so if I go into the dev UI, what I want to see in here is, first of all, I probably want to print out what the values actually are somehow, right? I want to be able to see them. Which at the moment we cannot do. And so inside editable size, what I probably want to do here is say, yeah, call the label F, we'll pass in something like this, maybe. I don't know exactly what I want to do there, but we'll do something like that. And the same will be true here. If we just do drag manipulation, we could avoid passing the min and max as well. I don't know what I think about that. Because if you wanted to have ways of controlling what the range was, I think we're still going to want it. So I think I'm going to keep passing that, honestly. That's just my guess. So yeah, so here's the X, here's the Y. And then what I want to do is add the ability to drag those around, right? Have a way of playing with those. And so in here, if I select one, now we can see that those are actually printed out there. And so what I want to be able to do is like highlight one of these and drag it around, right? Have the ability to actually move that. And so what I think we're going to have to move from is like label F, right? I don't really want to do in that case. What I want to do is I want to actually do more what label F is actually calling through to, like basic text element, where I can define my own interaction that's going to happen and my own like specifics about all of this stuff, right? So let me go ahead and call that. I don't know if I care about the v2. I don't think I do. But basically what I want to do here is just say, okay, when you do this, right? And we've got that label F call, right? When you do this, just go ahead and make this out of what you've got, like that, and then call basic text element yourself with whatever the thing is that you've got. The interaction here can be whatever we're going to make it. And the rest of these things we can set however we want. I probably will keep these. I don't really know about the border part of it. The backdrop color obviously can just be something, yeah, I don't know what it should be, whatever it is for these things, right? Like, I don't know. Something like this. So we should be able to do something here where now we can take more control of that process and make an actual widget, for lack of a better term, that just lets us do the drag interaction that we wanted, which I don't really know what it's going to be, but you know, we'll implement something that we think is reasonable. So yeah, so in here, like if I have this thing, now you can see that I'm drawing it there. I feel like it wants a border, probably. I don't know how big it wants the border to be. I guess, why did I recompile? I could have just done that live, and probably should have. So let's try that. So the border didn't seem to do anything, did it? Like, I don't see that doing anything. What is basic text elements use of the border? Or maybe that's just too tiny. Oh, that's in pixels. Okay, that makes a little more sense. So that's more of a reasonable thing, right? And so, you know, I don't know how big we want to make that really, but it might want to be bigger than that, right? It might want to be more like 6, right? That's a pretty reasonable size to click on, and then I can kind of, you know, zoom around on it, right? I think we also want more spacing in between these two, but that's kind of a you know, like I said, when we go to pretty up this line, we'll take that a little bit more seriously. So yeah, again, same exact thing happened in here. And in this case, again, we just have kind of another, a different type of editing operation that's going to happen there. I also don't know if maybe this should just be a pointer to a v2, like editable v2. I think that might have been just dumb that I didn't do it that way. And so we'll see. We'll address that in one moment. So looking at the dev UI interaction, we know we can introduce a thing here, like, for example, toggle value, drag value, which we have. We can do something like that. But my question is, like, what's the editing here? And so if you look, we've got like a star P that it's being edited. What we probably can do is make that star, we can probably make that star P, we can probably make that star P be something that works whether you're dragging one variable or two, right? Because that's probably what was happening in the previous drag value stuff. So I think the only real issue here is there isn't anything that says how far the value should move relative to your drag, right? Like, there's no, we're just not including anything that gives you information about that. And that's unfortunate. That's about the only blocking factor. Because we'd like to include some stuff about, like, what the boundary, like how fast it should move when it's moving, the delta, you know, essentially. And that's just not, that's not forthcoming. So I don't have a lot of ideas about what the right way to do that would be. There's a lot of options, but I don't know that there's one of them that I find particularly compelling necessarily. What I can say is I do think that reinforces my sort of belief that these should largely be V2s, right? So here's the thought. If we do feed this back, then I guess we don't really need to do that. Because we are sort of doing a thing that returns results more immediately, what I could do here is just return the total mouse movement in question and just use that. So that does seem reasonable. And so if I come through here and say, oh, yeah, like the hot interaction or just the interaction that's currently ongoing is my interaction. So if I'm basically saying, look, yeah, like if this interaction is the one that's actually happening. So I am currently interacting with this thing. Then we could just do this, right? So like the dmouse p and the dmouse py, those take effect if this is the current thing that's getting interacted with, right? And so that seems pretty good. So all we would have to do there is just actually stuff the dev ID in there. So in here where we're actually doing the ID and the type just has to be equal to any type really. We don't really even need a different one. We can just make that be sort of a generic thing. So immediate button, you know, I'll make another one. We don't even really need it, as I guess what I'm saying, but it's just a draggable interaction, I guess, you know, any draggable. So if you end up interacting with it as a draggable thing, then that's all we needed, and we're good to go. That should be fine because then we can also do like a dx dy here, sort of a situation, and that allows me to take the min and max and use those as ranges, right? So I can basically say, look, the amount that we want to move here is going to be the max minus the min, you know? I want some fidelity of the range. So, you know, I want like 100 steps of that. So, you know, that is how far you should move when you drag this thing back and forth, right? That seems good to me. Reasonable, you know? Seems good to me. And so that allows me also here, I don't know exactly how I want to edit this particular value in this case, but that's mostly all we're talking about. So here what I can do is say, well, you know, I want to be able to do this. Probably y. Could be x plus y. I'm not sure which one I want to do, but something like that. So what I want to do in this case is I want to sort of say, well, I want to move this thing, but I want to move it proportional to how big it already is, right? So if the thing is, you know, if the thing is 10, I want to move it, you know, 0.1 each time or something. So I kind of want something, you know, that looks like that, right? And the problem with doing it that way is that doesn't properly respect the fact that it's a continuous thing. So because you end up in a situation where what you're essentially writing here is an ordinary differential equation, an equation where the change in the value is proportional to the value. handling it discreetly like this leads to some nasty edge cases. So we may want to say here, handle this as a real ODE. Might want to actually happen, right? Okay. So anyway, let me make this happen just so we can compile and get this working. So we need to obviously have the UI be something that's known to these functions. And we also need to be able to, let's see here, this is interaction, there we go. We also need to have this actually be handled. So let's finish printing these. Okay. Right now, remember, we only have immediate button. Oh God, what have I done? There we go. We only have immediate button. That's the only thing that we actually have here. So we need to make sure that we also have draggable. So really, as you can see, you know, we don't really need two cases because they're basically the same. So in either case, they can just be going through here and it's, you know, good enough, right? So let's see how that shakes out. If I want to start dragging one of these, well, I'll be honest, not working particularly well. Not great. Not fabulous. But at least it's highlighting. So, you know, okay. Not a stunning victory. You know, not a stunning victory. It's true. But let's take a look at what's going on in here and see why that's happening, right? Okay, so the UI interaction here should definitely, these should be equivalent because we're setting them to the same things. As far as I know, right? So when you do a mouse down on those, it should be setting, the hot interaction should get taken here. So I'm not really sure why that wasn't working. So dmouse P may not be set during that run through. I'm not super certain about that. Let me just make sure. And then we'll just step through it after I check that out. So during begin UI frame, no, it's set. I mean, there it is, right? So it sure seems like that should be valid. I'm going to go ahead and step in there and just see what's going on, because I don't know. Hopefully it will be clear, and we won't have to puzzle too much. But if it's not, that's just the way of the world. That's just the way the crooked crumbles. All right, so let me go ahead and set a breakpoint there. Let's just look at what's going on in that at that piece of the code, right? So in here where we're doing one of these, we'll just say, okay, let's break on one of these. Anytime I'm dragging, I should hit that. So I am hitting it. Oh, did the same thing. You never learn. You never do learn, do you? As I said before, and as I had to well, I guess I predicted it before, so I didn't actually have to debug to find it. But it, still not really a valid excuse. We need to say whether edits occurred, because otherwise nobody in the outside code will know that they need to update what they're doing. So technically this should always look like this, right? We should always set edit occurred after we do something where where the edit system should respond. Anyone on the outside who needs to do work should respond. So we've got that working now, and we can go ahead and see if this happens. Yeah, so that's fine. All right, so now I can drag left to right, and I can drag up and down, so that's good. So I should be able to set these percents pretty easily now. And I need to make sure those things stay within bounds. I'm not sure why it's doing like a mod style thing there. Oh, I know why. Because these are stored in a way that automatically clamps them. That's why. This also looks like it's working just fine. So I think we're pretty much good to go. That's all the things we actually needed. So yeah, not really very difficult, right? Pretty basic stuff, nothing too hard there, and now everything is properly being edited. Again, the undo stream is getting spammed left and right. So let's do one thing real quick. Let's go into the DevUI system, and I just want to put in the clamping there. So I want to do like clamp, and I want to do min-x, max-x here. And I want to do a clamp here as well. So, oh, whoops. And again, I just want to do that clamp because since we are passing the min and max in, we might as well just do that work for the user, because everyone obviously who has a min and max is going to want us to clamp for them. That's just unsurprising, right? So that way we can't go below 1, and we can't go, I'm sorry, we can't go above 1, and we can't go below 2, right? So that just allows us to edit that, easily, which is what I want. Okay. So that's simple. No issues there. This one doesn't take a min and max, so it doesn't clamp. We could take a min and max if we wanted to. I don't know whether we want to or not. That's really up to us. So that's all simple, pretty simple and straightforward. And I again want to just underscore the spamming part. That's probably what we should go look at next, and then we'll go look at the beautification aspect of it, just to try and make things less ugly, right? So here I am wingling this all around, right? And now if I want to undo that, what you can see is I've got to undo like the whole thing, right? And it's just like, that's not what that is, right? When I do an operation like that, I want to have some way of bulking those up. So let's go upgrade that system a little bit before we go on to the beautification. So what we want to do here is, well, there's a couple things we want to do here, but what we want to do here is we want to make sure that we have a more robust way of tracking these things, right? These in-game edits. And so what I'd like to do is change the way we're getting those to be a little bit more, to be a little bit saucier, right? So when we do one of these edit operations, what I want to do, instead of allocate editor edit here, I want to do like a find editor edit, really, right? So I want to do something more like this. Something like this, or get or create edit in progress, you know, like, because I want to essentially, I want to essentially look to see if I have one of something, and then if I do, I will use it, right? So how I do that exactly is going to change a little bit the way that this stuff works. So first of all, this is going to want to be more down here, right? So this is going to be a regular function now that just operates directly. And this is going to be the function that actually does the thunk through. Okay? So we'll thunk through on that in some way. And then we'll use that in-game edit to work. So the problem that we'll run into immediately is that how edits are merged will have a lot to do with what they're storing. And so what we need to do is we need to do more of a provisional push where we say, look, this is the information that we are going to need to be true. Can you get us something that has that? Which means this isn't really going to be how we're going to want to do it. Not exactly. What we're going to want to do here is like say, this is what we're looking for. This is our match, if you will. And so when we set the match, we would set like the type and the asset index and the align point index, because those are the things that actually matter, right? So what we want to do here is say, okay, like, let's put those things in place. What's this called? So what we want to do is say, all right, get us, get me one of those things. And I'm going to pass you the match type for that. And I want you to return me one that I can use. You know what I mean? Excuse me. So we're going to need to do something like that, right? That's, we're going to need to do something like that. And I'm not sure exactly how I do it. I guess one way I could do it too is I could do it like this. The align point edit where I do the match, right? I could do it more like this sort of a thing. So I just pass an abstract match sort of type here, something like that, that gets used in the matching, and off we go. That seems plausible. So, in there, if it works, if it's a new one, it'll just assign whatever this thing is to it. Maybe something like that. I don't know, right? So it'd be something like this, and maybe like this sort of a thing, right? So we'd say, okay, here's the initial value that we would have saved. We'll give you that. We will then ask you to give us back either one that exists or one that doesn't exist. If it doesn't exist, I'm assuming you will set it, right? And then from there, I'm going to make the change and store the new value. Seem fair? Maybe? I don't know. Does it? Maybe it doesn't. But I think that's good. Like, I think that's roughly what we want to do. And so in here, what I want to do is I want to say, all right, this will take a void star that's like, here's the match data to use. So when we come through and do the get or create edit in progress, we want to look through all of the things that we currently have in progress, which will be this stuff here, right? And we want to see if we can find one that matches. So we want to do like in-game edit test equals in progress sentinel next. And I want to say this can't be equal to this because it's a sentinel-based list. So we have to go until we hit the sentinel. Right? So that would look over all of the things we want to test. And then what we need to do is look in there and see, are the align points the same? So that, unfortunately, is a case-based thing, right? We don't want to check the change part. We just want to check these two. So it's actually specific to the type. So the align point editor here, right? We have to say, like, first of all, if the test type equals the type, then we can check. Otherwise, we can't check at all. And then what we do is we say, well, this is the only one we've got. So we can't match anything else. Excuse me. And you know what? I might not do that. I might say that anything else doesn't get merged because we only want to merge things that we actually know merge, right? So if we were going to edit this align point in the current in progress edits, then what we want to do is say, look, is it the same asset and align point index? If it is, then it's a match. So then what I would, and also I guess what I want to do is have a way of getting out of this loop, right? So I would say if the match version, and in this case, again, I kind of know what this type is now because you've given me the match version of it. You know, I might say let's be piggier there. Let's actually do that. Let's just do that. That seems reasonable. And that way we could just say, oh, okay, you know, this is in-game edit. There's the match, and this will do this will set the whole thing. That seems better. It's not the cleanest thing in the world, but it's all right. So I'll do that. We'll look at that one, and if it works, we'll assign it other. You know, this will just do exactly what it was doing before. Everything will work essentially the same. And we probably don't need this cast anymore either, because you know we're just not that specific about it now. So we probably can just do this like that. So and then we don't need this. And this seems better. So there we go. We'll look for the match, assuming that we find the match, meaning if align point edit asset index equals test align point edit asset index, and the align point index equals test align point index align point index, or sorry, edit, then we're good. And we're good to go. So when we come down to the bottom here, what we need to do is say, like, look, if we didn't find anything, and maybe found is the wrong word here, maybe found should just be result, right? Because it's what we're going to return. So what we want to do is say, look, if we found a result, we can just return it because we're good to go. But if we didn't find a result, then what we need to do is say, give me a new one, right? Which is this code right here. And I want it to be the type that they were asking to try and match. When we actually get it back, you know, inside here, right, when it does this push first and it sets the result type and so on, that's not constructive. We don't really want that anymore because that allocate editor edit actually, you know, I must say, let's just get rid of this. I don't know that I want this at all. So I'm just going to pull this down here like that. And I'm going to say this goes away. And really what we're going to do now instead is we're going to put this onto the in progress stack. And we're going to, when we do this push, and we get back the results there, we're going to romp over the allocated memory that we got and just set it equal to what they gave us. Because we're going to assume that's what they wanted to start with, right? So that allows us to stack up those in-progress edits, and anytime you're going to do the same operation, it'll just use one that already exists, right? So once we have that down, then what we need to do is actually have some way of committing these back, right? So when we do editor interact, what we want to do is say, okay, anytime the mouse goes up and we're going to clear an interaction, we probably want that to be a more specific thing that happens, right? So that's like an end. So this is like an end interaction state. And what I want to do here is say that these are interaction ending things. Does that make sense? If the mouse goes up, that's when it ends whatever the interaction is that we were doing. And then that can come down here oops. So that anyone inside here who wants to say that this was an interaction ending thing can just do that, right? And so here when we do pick asset, we can see that that would do it as well. I think this only wants to happen in here, probably. So those all want to do interaction ends. When we get to that point, right, then what I can do is say, all right, when we go to end an interaction, all in progress things move on to the undo stack, right? So everything gets pushed on as an undo. Now, the interesting thing about that, right, is that there could have been multiple changes in that in progress sentinel. Right now, we know that can never really happen. But if we were to make that happen, what we want to do, and I'm going to put to do for this, right, allow chains of undos. So a single undo can represent many undos. When we get to that point, this is the place where we would do it. We would take the whole chain and just put it onto the undo stack as one single entry. So we can do that. We just we don't need to do it now. It's not really gonna make it life any harder for us, really. So we can just do that as the need arises. But in the meantime, what we would doing is we'd be saying while while whatever the in progress sentinel list is, while it's not empty, we would just do a push first, pop first, right? Where we say take whatever you got on that in progress sentinel, put it on the undo sentinel. Okay. So again, what we basically did there is we created like a holding cell, right, for all of our changes, so that we could, oops, I don't know how that got written as text, so that our changes would buffer in there and we could coalesce them, right? We could combine them together. And so then what we want to do is move those off of that anytime we finish an interaction. Because that means all of the changes that happen during that drag operation or whatever else is happening, that needs to now get retired as an actual valid undo change that we want to record. Let me see what else we got here. That's just a... Oh, whoops. Still wrong. No. This is just always that. It's not. That's not the type we're talking about. Legal use of this type of expression. Yes, that doesn't need to be there anymore. And this is not the UI. Sorry, my bad. That's just the editor. All right, so, you know, that was unhappy about this. I know why as well. That needs to be initialized. Again, you notice how annoying it is to have clear to not have clear to 0. Anything that's clear to 0 just always works, and anything that's not is just waiting to be an uninitialized variable problem. And that's a lot of times where you get people who really like constructors and things like this. Those are really not necessary if clear to 0 just works, but there's a couple things where it doesn't, and it's unfortunate. You know, I almost don't want to use those kinds of methods specifically because of that. All right, so let's see here. So let's say I undo back, and let's see if this works. So I'm dragging this all around now, right? And then I'm dragging this all around now, and then I'm dragging this all around now. So the first thing that should happen is that should undo, and it does. Now the next thing that happens is this should undo, and it did. And now we should undo this back to, yeah, and we're back to nothing. So that all looks pretty good to me. Like that seems like that's operating pretty faithfully. And you know, we can do all of our stuff here. We can toggle things. We can change the sizes. We can redo stuff. We can undo stuff. So that feeling pretty good. I mean, that interface is pretty solid now. I don't know how much time I have left. Probably about a half an hour. Do I want to say that's probably about right? I'm gonna go ahead and yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and say I've got something like that, and I'm just gonna take that time to pretty it up, right? I'm just gonna spend some time prettying up. Maybe if I also have time, I'm gonna make these things properly snap to the upper corners of the screen because they're annoying me that they're hanging around like this, and it's annoying, right? It's super not what I want. Super not what I want is a new thing. And there is one other aspect of this system that we have to consider at some point. And again, like I said, I avoided doing anything with it because I'm not really sure what I want to do. But we need some argument, excuse, metaphor, paradigm for what is supposed to happen with the debug UI when it coexists with this UI. Like I said, I don't really want them unified completely because the debug UI stuff should kind of compile out entirely probably, whereas this will always be available for people who want to import art into the game, even end users, I think. And so I want to say that the best thing to do there is going to be to have some sort of a modal thing that says if you're in editor mode, the debug UI just turns itself off or something. Like I don't want them getting involved. I want the debug UI to stay completely separate. So we'll see what we can do about that. You know. We'll see. By the way, while we're on the subject of this, I do want to know what the story is with that baseline stuff. Is it just a case of like this going the wrong way? Like when we call get baseline, was that just going the wrong way? Or something? Like it's just supposed to be plus? Because we used to have y going the other direction. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, is it just a case of actually everything's fine, and when we switched the order of those coordinates, we never fixed that, you know? So it should just be something like this. You know? And I don't know. I have no idea. I'm just wondering if that has something to do with it. No, it definitely doesn't. Okay, so that looks like not it. I do want to know then too about the text out function. So in here, how does that do its adjustment? Because, when you do when it's actually drawing the text, right? It does a bitmap offset, and it's got like an at x and an at y and stuff like that. So when it does that, I'm wondering how it's computing the offset of the actual, the glyphs themselves, to figure out like how they should be aligned on the, on the off of the baseline. And I'll be honest, I don't see that information here, which is a little bit strange because you need to know how far up it is in order to make that determination. So I'm guessing that what was happening is everyone was aligned to the top when we originally made the fonts because pixels were going down, and then when we switched to having an upside down coordinate system, maybe we just never did the the actual realignment of it. Maybe. It's a bit of a stretch. I'm reaching a little on that. I don't mind telling you. But it seems likely. So you can see here, we've got a glyph. There ain't no information in here about alignment. So I'm assuming that what actually is happening there is you have to back up to the baseline and then come down. Right? That's what I would assume. So I would guess that really what we're seeing here is the fact that the actual alignment of this thing, when we do, when we're actually doing this bitmap offset, I think this actually has to have baked into the Y sort of like a baseline alignment, for lack of a better term. So what it would need to do is it would need to actually take whatever the dimension of the thing was, right? It would need to take this and say, I need to go that far. I'm at the bottom. I need to go to the top and then back that however big the character was to align it to the top. So this at y needs to be like plus whatever the total height is. So ascender plus descender, which I assume is baseline. Like that kind of thing. I don't remember what was happening in there. What is get starting baseline y? What does that do? So that's the ascender height. I don't know if ascender height is the right thing there. I'm not sure, because it's been a long time since we looked at this stuff. But either or, that's okay. We can fool around with it and figure out what we actually encoded there. I'm going to go ahead and say it's something like that. Like, that's roughly what's going on here. If not, exactly what's going on here. So it's getting a little closer, not quite right. And I guess one thing is the bitmap scale here would also come into play. So the ascender height, you know, like this also would have to multiply these, right? But that is, I think, set to 1 at the moment, so that ain't gonna help us because we would only have errors there if we did it backwards. So, you know, looking at that, it's like that aligns everything to the top in a weird way, so it's not quite that. So what could be causing those, just the symbols, to be lowered like that? I don't quite get. I mean, maybe we need both of these. Still not quite right, though. But you can see how those are now more correct, right? And these are now more incorrect. It's very curious. So I think we're on the right track. It's mainly just a problem of not really remembering exactly how we bake these down. I probably should go look just to see how we were actually encoding them. In fact, I could just do that. So here's, you know, our ascender, descender height stuff. Let me take a look at how we were actually pulling these things out. So, yeah, like, you know, here's us getting the bounding box of the thing. Oh my. Oh, how interesting. Wow. So we really got saucy here. You know, I'm glad I looked because I never would have guessed that. That's some pretty fancy footwork there, my friends. Yeah, wow. Okay. Boy, we didn't pull any punches on that one. So effectively, what we did there uh, is we said, yeah, let's just bake how that glyph gets aligned to the baseline into the align percentage of the bitmap, because why not? Right? So the align percentage, which is going to offset the thing, is going to offset it by this value. Problem is, this alignment was probably going the wrong direction. That'd be my guess, right? That is kind of crazy. So there's one of two things could have happened. Thing number one is that we just never fixed that for fonts when we were messing with our coordinate systems and stuff. And so it was always wrong. Another is that it actually is right, and I'll go through the math here and try to determine whether it is or not. So that'll be the way we'll figure that out. But the other way is that actually the math was right for this, and this should be correct. But what happened was when we took and when we did our import, there's like a bug in this code that makes the align percentages not work properly or something like this, right? And you know, it looks like they'd be fine. Because it certainly looks like it's getting ingressed there. Let's take a quick look at it, shall we? So let's go into Handmade hero data and let's just ask for a dump of the test fonts. And let's just make sure they've got some same values there, right? This will do that, yeah. And I'll load that up into tab view. Let's see. And so those look, you know, that unless we did something really wrong, looks okay. They look tiny. You know, but I could be convinced those were right. You know, I'm not willing to say those got corrupted yet. The fact that they're all pretty low, you know, doesn't necessarily seem great. But you know, it's 6 and 1/2 dozen of the other. So that could be one problem. If I do look at set align point, let me go in there. If I do look at set align point there, you know, it doesn't look like there's that much room for error. So that seems like it's probably working okay. So I think I'm gonna say it's hard to say where to look first, but I'm gonna say let's start with the math of this. Like I just want to look at this situation. So we're starting by saying, all right, we took, and let's pop over to the blackboard just so like we can draw these out and have some idea of like where they actually are. So looking at this here, we've got a couple different things. We drew a bitmap, right? And this bitmap is not bottom up, right? It's top down. So when we're actually specifying this thing, you know, I don't know, do we flip it here? We're using this fonts from Windows path. And so you can see here, we kind of work from the top down. This is some weird code, dude. So both of them go from the top down. But why? Right? I mean, there's no reason for them to go from not from the top down, they all go backwards. So they all start at the end of the image and go backwards. But there's no reason for them to do that. Is there? It's like it was gonna flip them around, but then it doesn't flip them around. I don't get it. So I don't know why that's doing that. Does not need to do that, I don't think. I don't understand that very well at all. So you can see here, right? This intentionally leaves a 1 pixel apron, and it starts writing at the last row, and it's going to write backwards. This one starts also at the last row. It moves back by the min X, but by the min Y, but I'm not sure what the point of that is really. But I guess it's just saying don't go that many up. So I got nothing. I mean, that's just crazy. I have no idea what's going on here. This code is kind of super crappy and nuts. It's in the test asset builder, so, you know, there is that. But anyway, when we go through these, that's just bizarre. So that's going to make it a little harder to work through this because we don't really know why it's doing that, and that could affect this construction, which is not my favorite thing. But let's look at what these actually refer to. So bound height here must be something that's discussed further up. So here we have the height that I guess the font would say that this character is, right? So the font says, you know, it's this big. We ask it for the size, and it comes back with that. So bound height is like how big that text is. I think that's probably going to be usually tight, but maybe not, right? So the fact that we're checking to see what the stuff is here suggests that it's not that tight, actually. Because otherwise, why would we have had to do that? Like, we wouldn't have had to have done that, right? So the bound height is probably going to be something, right? Like, if we imagine, like, here's a capital A, the bound height is probably going to be something like that, where it's like, you know, it's a little bit much. I'm just guessing. The TM descent is how far the descenders go. So that's like this distance. Right, you imagine if there was like one of these, it would actually be, like that distance, right? But I'm just saying, like, that's the part below the line. So we're taking whatever the bound height is and we're subtracting off the descent. So that value there is effectively, we've now got this. This is our, at the moment, our, I don't know, we'll call that B, let's say. So that's B. So we're taking our max y, which is the highest value that we've seen, and we're subtracting b from I'm sorry, no, we're subtracting b from it, right? And so we're just I guess that align point is just trying to figure out if we were here and we needed to go up to where we would start, where would that be? It's a pretty tortured way to do that. But I can sort of see why. And so max y is the maximum value that we could have achieved, and that's where we want to start our drawing. So normally we would go to that max y. Okay, so I'm starting to see what the problem is here too. If we're assuming that you can align outside of the 0 to 1 range, which this could definitely do, because there's no reason why these have to be constrained by this, right? So you could have a negative value that presumably is quite a bit more than the height value. So you could end up with negative larger than 1, or negative something. Like negative, it doesn't have to be there. You could end up with less than 0. And we don't currently allow that. Right? So if we wanted to make that align percentage be able to properly handle the fonts, that looks like actually the problem. So that value might be correct, and we may have actually done the flip around because it kind of looks like it is doing that in there. But I think the reason that we're actually getting those is actually just because it might be requiring us to encode them better, which we could do. If we wanted to do that, all we would have to do here is just allow for things to be offset. So, what do we want the range to be, right? Like, what do we want that mapping to be, because it's kind of up to us. So when we do this p% here and we multiply this out by the U16 max, what we want to do is just precondition this value, really. You know what I mean? So we want it to be in the 0 to 1 range. And so what we want to do is say, whatever it is, let's do a clamp 0, 1 map to range on it, and give it a min and a max, right? So we'll say in here, that we've got some min and max, whatever we want them to be. So, okay, you can do up to a -2 to 2 or something, right? Like we support, a wider gamut there of percentages that are allowed. And then when this thing comes out, right? So when we do clamp 0 to 1 map to range, we just say, look, put this thing in between there and give me back a 0 to 1 value that actually works. When we then create this thing, we know we just need to start at -2 and go out by however much that percentage gives us to re-spread out to the entire range of the thing, right? So we could do that. If we now run the program, we should get nutso stuff, right? Because it's not encoded that way on import. But what we then can do is say, well, all right, now let's re-import that data that we had before. So, here we've got all these test HHAs, right? And so if I want to dir the v0 directory there, and I want to bring all of these back in a bulk import, right? I can delete all of my HHAs in question here, including the text files. And then I can just update those. So I can do a rewrite v0 intro art HHA. And each of these I can just do. There's test 1, 2, 3, and test fonts. And also, I guess I should have put the v2 on those. So yeah, that was a crazy one, but you notice it was exactly correct. So yeah, there you go. Debugging is debugging. If you go find the problem, turns out the fix is usually easy. So let's make a local and let's let this re-import. But that was good. So we've got that bug solved, and that was our fault with the HHA upgrade. We did not properly account for some of the uses of that. And it turns out it was pretty simple for us to do so, so we just did. Now this stuff is more properly aligned, I think. It definitely looks like it is. So the beautification path should be much easier now. And now these are all proper. So that's good. Let's go to brief Q&A there. And then we should be able to, next stream, we'll do the beautification and get that editing window looking nice. What does pound mean? I looked it up, but I don't think I understand what its use is. Is it supposed to link different variables into one variable? So pound is actually, it's only available in preprocessor macro expansion. And so that's why, if you haven't seen it or aren't familiar with it, that's probably why. It's not actually in the C++ grammar. For code, it's only in the preprocessor. And so when you see that pound operator, what that's actually saying is, normally I've got something like, here's my macro, and I've got A and B, right? And the way that the macro preprocessor works is when it gets two parameters, it then looks inside the text that's coming for the macro expansion. So the expansion of the macro, this is the expansion here, right? It's going to look at that, and it's going to say, anytime I see a recognizable token, so in the traditional C sense of the word token, so an identifier is a letter and then some series of letters and numbers with underscores, right? Anytime I can pluck out a token, I will look back to see if that token matches one of the named parameters, and if it is, I will substitute in the result. So if I was to do this, and then I typed this, okay, what I would expect to see as the result in the resulting code is this, okay? Because as it expands this, it looks at the A and says, well, it's when it looks at this expansion, it goes, let me read the expansion. First token, is this the expansion? Does that match parameter? No. A, does that match parameter? Yes. What was the value of it? Okay, put it in place, right? Does this match parameter? Yes. What was the value of it? Put it in place, okay? The problem is it means that if your goal for this was to produce that, you can't do it because typing that makes it look at the token as if it were A, B, and then it can't find either of those here, so it just does that, and that's not what you wanted. So this operator, actually what it does is nothing. It actually does nothing, but the key is you needed some way to have nothing there so that it could see the two different tokens. So what it actually does is it just serves as a nothing that you can insert between two things so that it can recognize them. So now what happens is it goes, what's the first token? This is the expansion. Okay, put that in the output. It doesn't match anything. What's the next token? A, what does that match? This, put the value there. So it does that, right? What's the next thing? Pound, pound. What does that evaluate to? Nothing. So we're still right here and ready to go. What does the next token equal? B, what's that? This. Okay, output the 2. And so that's how you get the 12, right? So that's really all it is nothing. But sometimes, especially when you're dealing with text processing, nothing is very important because the nothing is what allows you to glue those things together. That's why it's called the paste operator, glues things together, but it doesn't actually do anything. The operator isn't actually doing that, I guess is the way I would say it. What the operator should really call the nothing operator, if that's what you want, because that's what it does. It just so happens that nothing is exactly what you need. Hopefully that helps answer the question. Skin Pop. I've been trying to implement the walk system from a recent talk. The talk made the point that shrinking the walk edge is trivial. I've made it that far in my own code, but I haven't been able to figure out how to do the shrinking without testing all edges against all segments of the walk edge. That approach doesn't scale well, so I was wondering if you could say a few words about how you did it, assuming you had another approach. So let me just make sure I understand what you're saying you tried. Testing all edges against the segments of the walk edge. No, that's correct. So I guess what I would say is no, that you're doing the right thing. The only thing I would say is you have to implement it in a way that does scale well. So let me give you a real quick. This is really off topic here, but I'll try to give you the idea. So what you need is a fundamental operator on the grid, on the walk grid, right? So I've got the grid. And what you need is a fundamental operator that says, I have an edge. Apply the edge to the grid, if you will, right? And so if this is my edge, then I have some fundamental operator which rasterizes that edge effectively into the points of the grid that would be affected by it. Make sense? Because you know it's like this or something. So you're doing the right thing, I think, but I guess I would just say you might be doing it in slightly the wrong way. Instead of testing all of the edges in your system versus the walk edge, you need to think of it more as a spatial query that can very easily determine, like, you know much more easily than checking all of these edges which ones fall within the knockout region of that of that walk edge, right? So you don't want to be testing, like you should never be testing this edge against this because it's simply not in the spatial domain. So you want to write all of your code to only iterate over the possible poles that could be involved in that edge. It's exactly analogous to anything else you might do in a game where you have a large playfield and you're doing like collision detection and stuff. You only do it on the things that are local to that. And you usually have a way of fast lookup, right? You have a way of doing fast access to like buckets that only contain things in a local space, and you need to do that here as well. Does that help? Synthusist, hi, do you know how to rotate a font? Do you use SVB for font rendering? So no, we don't use SVB for font rendering because on Handmade Hero, we don't use libraries. So we just directly go to Win32 and we get the font that way. However, one time on Sean's birthday, I did do a demonstration of how to use STD TrueType. So there is if zeroed out code that shows how you would call STB TrueType, but we don't use it at the moment. As far as how to rotate a font, so I guess what I would say is we do all of our rotation in real time because obviously that's something that's very easy to do if you already have a renderer that rotates sprites. You could just rotate, if I wanted to rotate a font, I would just rotate it when I go to render it. I wouldn't pre-rotate the font. So if you're actually talking about how do I pre-rotate the font and like save it out as a font that has been rotated, which I can't say sounds like a good idea, but let's say you were going to do that. Then what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to either leverage the underlying library you're using to make the font, if you have one, to ask it to rasterize it originally in that angle, which, for example, even though we're not using any libraries, we are calling Windows to get the font, and it happens to have a thing that allows you to set the angle of a font for rasterization, if I remember correctly. So you could actually do that. In some sense, it's more powerful to not use a library to rasterize your font than to use one because Windows, if you're getting the font from that directly, it actually is, in a sense, a giant library. It just so happens that almost all of it is useless for games, right? But it is a giant library that you have there and you can use. So in some sense, not using TrueType, STB TrueType is actually a benefit because if you go through Windows, I think it does have the ability to tilt the font for you if you wanted that. I don't know if that's what you're asking. OpenType, so more complete font libraries. STB TrueType is like a one-header, it's supposed to be small, right? It's supposed to be compact, easy to use in your project. More complex libraries like OpenType or FreeType or whatever it's called, that might have it too, the ability to tilt. I don't know. But I don't think STB TrueType does because it's kind of outside the scope of what STB TrueType was down to do. So if you only have access to, say, something like STB TrueType, which rasterizes the fonts, and you need them to be rasterized rotated, then you've got two options. One, you can go edit STB TrueType to rotate the curves prior to rasterizing them. Okay, that's a mod to STB TrueType. Not a particularly hard one probably, but it is a mod. Two, you could write a TrueType font loader that loads a TrueType font, rotates all the curves, and writes it out as a new font, then pass it to STB TrueType. That would work too. Or, the final thing, let STB TrueType or whatever library you're using rasterize the font right side up, and then you write something like we have on Handmade Hero when we wrote our software rasterizer that takes a rectangle and can rotate the rectangle. Call that into an off-screen bitmap, re-grab the rectangle, and save it out. I mean, those are your options. I would, however, ask again, are you sure that you want to actually rotate the font and not actually just take the output of the font as unrotated and rotate it at runtime? Be sure you actually want what you want before you go too far down one of those roads, right? So, all right, let's wrap it up. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for another episode of Handmade Hero. It's been a pleasure coding with you, as always. If you would like to follow along the series at home, you can always pre-order the game at handmadehero.org, and it comes with the source code, so you can play around with it. If you're interested in learning engine programming and you want to follow what we're doing on the series, that's a good way to do it. I will be back here for another Krampusloft surprise stream, probably tomorrow, let's be honest. There's going to be a lot of streams this month and next month. So hope to see you back here for that surprise. Can't promise when it's going to be, but it'll be sometime soon. Until then, have fun programming. I'll see everyone on the internet. Take it easy, everybody.